Yeah, you can hear me, you can see me. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yes.
It happens sometimes. Yeah. Okay, so then yeah, I said welcome. Yeah, did I say right? Yeah, so welcome everybody, and we're going to talk about transforming problems, right? So after having yeah, we went over the exploring bodhicitta, or yeah, the bodhicitta model before. So now it's from the point of view of using that as transforming the problems into happiness. Yeah. So for that purpose, as mainly it's based on the bodhicitta ideal. Yeah, you can also, I will indicate, use it as a secular way of transforming problems. But yeah, try to generate a kind of motivation for the purpose of progressing on the stage of path to enlightenment. And for that purpose, we want to know how to transform difficulties into the path, all for the benefit of developing yourself to full extent to be of the greatest benefit for others, you know. So try to generate kind of motivation for yourself. And then imagine in front Sakyamuni Buddha, surrounded by the masters of India, Tibet, and the other Buddhist traditions, and then surrounding yourself countless sentient beings undergoing the different types of difficulties of suffering of body and mind, and think it's our responsibility, or how wonderful it will be if we can do something about it. So we take that in responsibility or in action to imagine you lead all those sentient beings when we recite the prayers together. Yeah.
To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. The indescribable, inconceivable, and inexpressible perfection of wisdom, unproduced, unceasing, the nature of space, object of the uniquely knowing transcendental wisdom, to the mother of the victorious ones of the three times I prostrate. Tayata gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi suha. Tayata gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi suha. Tayata gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi suha.
Sangye chudang sungye chunama chancho badu dani kyasuchi. Dagi chushe gibe sonangi dola penshe sangye drupa sho sangye
Chudang sukye chunama
chancho badu dani kyasuchi. Dagi chushe gibe sonangi dola penshe sangye drupa sho sangye
Chudang sukye chunama
chancho badu dani kyasuchi. Dagi chushe gibe sonangi dola penshe sangye drupa sho Chutuntu kangi tusnizuve tawatanchi bawachi tamchi tusuntunzu ba gotam de la chatserlo. Yeah, so transforming problems into the path that is explained from the point of view, that's first of all important to know. From the point of view of basically the bodhicitta ideal, one aspect. Another aspect is taking past and future lifetimes into account, and also take karma into account. Yeah, so that's kind of first of all, not, yeah, for a beginner Buddhist, not easy topics, but yeah, past and future lifetimes we talked about already quite a few times, the possibility of the continuity of consciousness, right? And karma, also we had one model on karma. So those two aspects are quite important when transforming problems into into the part, as we say. So what the thing is that difficulties in life, is it physical or mentally, you know, there's a capacity to actually use them in the part. When you're sick or when you're depressed, then you're stuck for a particular period of time. But you can do two things. You can just be sick and depressed, or you can be sick and depressed and use it in a way that benefits your life, you know. So that's kind of, when you're sick or depressed or down or you know, difficulties in life in general, or facing obstacles, well, you're not in control. You know, when you get sick, you don't want to get sick, but it just happens to you, right? In a similar way, when we're down or depressed or have some obstacles, then often it happens beyond, I mean, most cases, it happens beyond our control, right? We don't want this, but it just happens to us. So if that's the case, then our mental attitude is very essential. Yeah, and we talk about many times people in very difficult situations in occupied Tibet. Yeah, so that people in prison, and then not just for a short period of time, but for years in prison, being tortured, being starved, always on the edge of death and dying, but surviving, and then there's a lot of pain of you know, torture and those kind of aspects. So I met many. One of my own teachers spent many years in prison, and yeah, if you see how they come out, there's basically no trauma, first of all, right? So there's something mentally extremely strong. Yeah, one of my classmates also, he went back to see his family, and then many years ago, that was many years ago. That was a bit more difficult, but yeah. So then also I said, how was it? He said, yeah, 2 weeks with my parents, but then a few months in prison, and you know, it was quite difficult. But yeah, I got my health back, and I'll be back on the debate courtyard to see you soon. Yeah. So that's kind of a completely different attitude towards these kind of quite intense difficulties in life. So then when Daniel Brown from the University of the, I should say, Harvard Medical School, yeah, when the research was done regarding, yeah, it was a research we done with Tibetans imprisoned in occupied Tibet and being tortured, and then looking at the data, then there was a very strong significance kind of group. The majority does not have post-traumatic stress disorder, which is very, very uncommon. Yeah, so that doesn't happen that often. So it was cultural related. That's what Daniel Brown said. But then they didn't know the answer. Why? How is that possible? That a whole culture, people can deal with these issues with no other person on the planet is capable of doing, you know? So that's very interesting. So then Daniel Brown asked His Holiness the Dalai Lama for an answer. And then that's in relation with the topics we're going to talk about. Then His Holiness says 2 reasons. There's 2 ways how this can be done, you know? One is having faith in the law of cause and effect. Yeah, if you have difficulties in life and you cannot do anything about it, then you're stuck with your mind, right? You're stuck. If you can do any, if you can take action to stop violence or to stop harm or to stop people misbehaving, you should do that, right? That's clear. But if you're in kind of situations like being imprisoned and tortured, you cannot do anything at that time, right? So you have to deal with it mentally. So in those cases, then His Holiness says one aspect is understanding karma, knowing that nothing is random in our lives. Things come and go by the power of cause and conditions. Yeah, so one aspect is the acceptance of a difficulty. And then from a Buddhist perspective, the difficulty doesn't come in a random way. Yeah, so that is related with, you know, having created the causes for this in previous lifetimes. So then you already see that lifetimes plays a very important role in these aspects. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. If you just think about one lifetime, then all these things, there's no point in explaining it or try to put it into practice. You know, it's very difficult. So that's very important to understand, that the background of these mind trainings is very vast, right? So we think about lifetimes. And we also know since beginner's lifetime, we not always be very nice. Yeah. So if you just go down 40,000 years on this planet, if you think you've always been on this planet, you go 40,000 years back in time, and it was not really human-like, but it was not like humans like we know each other at the moment. And their lives was much more rough, right? The ape-like humans, I mean, that's very rough, you know. So then you can imagine if that's the case, if you be born in those kind of states, and then there's also a possibility to be born in other states where it's even more rough, you know. Yeah, so that's kind of quite clear that, yeah, that if you think in those lines, then you know what you have done in the past. Yeah, so that's kind of how we can see that the negative deeds we have done has a ripening effect. Yeah, so then if you experiencing difficulties, then you can see, okay, that's a part of life, and that's how it is, and we should accept that. And there's no point of try to avoid it or try to suppress it, or because it's not possible. So you have to accept it, you know. And then you can accept it from the point of view, it's karmic related. Yeah. So now I'm experiencing the results of the suffering I've caused in the past. Yeah. So that's kind of one aspect, is Holiness said, is karma, understanding karma, and then see, okay, I'm sick now, or okay, I'm depressed now, and that's just a ripening effect of negative karma. And then you think, in one way, okay, great. Now this negative karma, it comes to ripening, that means it's purifying. Yeah, so that's one aspect. When a karmic activity comes to ripening in a difficulty or a sickness, then that potential goes, right? So when that sickness is over, then you can imagine you purified a certain amount of negative karma. Yeah, so that's one aspect of the mind training, to see that it's a ripening effect of negative karma, and that by experiencing it, we purify. Yeah, so that's one answer as Holiness Dalai Lama gave, how it's possible for these people in prison. They understand they're tortured, they understand they in nature of starvation, always losing life, always on the edge of almost dying, and then very difficult situation. So they see, okay, I've created a cause for this, now experiencing it, and then acceptance is incredibly strong. If there's no acceptance, then it's very difficult. You know, whatever difficulty we face in life, the most difficult point is, I don't like this, you know. But if you can, okay, that's the part of life, and you accept it, it's much easier to deal with it, right? So that's very important to have this acceptance of the difficulties, that life is not perfect, you know. And then if you take karma into account, you can understand it better. Because there's always this question. I had this question before I became a Buddhist. Why are some people suffering more than others? You know, there must be a reason for that, right? That certain people have a reasonably okay life in this life, and other people have a terrible life. You know, why is that? So there should be a reason for that. It's not random, you know. So that means that a person who is enjoying the life in his nice house somewhere on the beach, somewhere, I don't know, whatever, my Spanish friends, they know what I'm talking about. Yeah, so a nice beach, and then you know, you have your cocktails and things like that, and you have your servants and things like that. And then you see a person in Africa, no food, almost starving, you know, and sickness. Then you think, oh, you know, then you think, why is the difference there? You know, but actually the person who seems to have a temporarily okay life, it doesn't mean that a person doesn't have the karma in the next life or future lifetimes to be born in a similar state as this person in Africa. And the other way around, this person in Africa can be reborn when the conditions meet and some positive karma comes to ripening in kind of, you know, in a kind of place or time that things are much easier in life, or with wealth and things like that, you know. So that's a very important insight. Otherwise, these trainings doesn't make that much sense. Because if you see that all the negativities we experience is not somebody to blame for, you know, there is kind of just a cause and effect relationships of negative karma being created in the past, and it comes to ripening. Yeah, so that's kind of one aspect of karma. The more you understand karma, the more you see the cause and effect relationships, then the way of acceptance when you have a difficulty in life is much easier. Yeah. So that's one of the answers His Holiness gave. That probably because those people in prison being tortured, they know this aspect of love, cause and effect. They have the complete acceptance of the suffering they experience, and that's why there's no mental suffering. The other one is the mind training of the bodhicitta ideal. Yeah, that we talked briefly about Tonglen last 2 weeks ago, right? So there's a practice that you take the suffering upon yourself. Yeah, so that's not an easy practice. You shouldn't start with that as a beginner if you don't like that. That's also, I made it very clear. But there's also an aspect of discovering Buddhism to explain that. You don't have to do it, but then at least you know the background behind it. Because Tonglen, what translates as giving and taking. Yeah? So what you do in the Tonglen practice, traditionally, we take the suffering of others and we give our own happiness to others. Yeah? So that means that if you experience a pain in the body or difficulty in the mind or whatsoever, then you imagine the suffering of all the sentient beings dissolve into that sickness or in that depression, and then you think, may I experiencing this, by experiencing this sickness or by experiencing this depression, or may all beings be free of suffering. May I take away the suffering by experiencing it. Yeah, it's just a mind training. You cannot really take people's suffering away, but what you do is you purify negative karma. Why do you purify negative karma? Because negative karma created in the past, in most cases, you created negative karma in relation to others, with harming others, right? And now you have an attitude to help others and well in a way to take away their suffering instead of causing them to suffer, you see? So that's why it's a very strong purification method that if you, and in a traditional way, you can do that on the breath, that you breathe in the suffering of others and you breathe out your own happiness and the cause of happiness for others, So, and then when you breathe in, you can imagine a dissolve into your sickness or dissolve into the pain in your body or dissolve in your depression so you breathe in the suffering of others and you give away your own happiness to others, that's kind of, and by breathing it in, then it dissolves into your sickness or your pain or depression whatsoever, So yeah, that can only be done after you contemplate what we discussed the previous model, right? If you don't have equanimity, then this is very difficult. You can say, okay, yeah, for this person I take the suffering away, but not for that person, right? So you need equanimity, that's pretty clear, as we saw that before. And also what we saw in the previous model, in order to do Tonglen, you have to get very close to people, otherwise it's not possible, So that means you remember the kindness, repay the kindness as we went over, and then the love and kindness aspect and the compassion, and then only this Tonglen makes more sense. Yeah, so that's kind of important to know the background of that aspect. So based on what we discussed last model, then if you do either the method of 7 instructions of cause and effect, or you do the method of exchanging self for others, whatever of those 2 methods you do, and there's also combined methods I was planning to explain next week, then you combine this Tonglen with either of those methods. Otherwise, you have to have compassion. If you don't have compassion for the wish for others to be free of suffering, to take their suffering, is not going to happen, right? Yeah. So that's kind of how we traditionally do that. And then you want to make it a little bit more spooky, or I mean spooky, more real, so to say. If you then imagine that the suffering of others in the form of black smoke, goes in, when you inhale, you take that, and then that suffering of others together with the causes, right, that dissolve into whatever pain you have in your body or whatever depression you have, or you can think it bombards or destroys the self-cherishing attitude. Yeah, we talked about last model also that the self-cherishing attitude is a strong cause for suffering. Yeah, so then to and it prevents us from helping others, right? So that's also an aspect what you can do with the Tonglen when you take in the suffering of others in that way. Yeah, there's more different types of visualization in the various mind trainings if you're interested. But yeah, we keep it simple. And then when you breathe out white light. Yeah, that you give all your causes for happiness to others, and then when you do that visualization, you imagine that all beings are free of suffering at the end of the meditation, and all beings have accomplished all happiness. Yeah, so then you can do the Tonglen with humans, with animals, with spirits, and if you like health, then you can do it with health as well, or God realms. Yeah, so there's kind of ways to do it with all the 6 realms of cyclic existence. Yeah, so that's kind of a traditional way, to do Tonglen practice. And then, whenever you have a difficulty in life, yeah, you can, in a traditional way. I'll just first explain traditional way. After that, I can give you some secular ideas. But in a traditional way, then, whenever you feel pain or whenever you're sick, instead of just being sick and laying in your bed and being sick, then when you do this visualization, it has an incredible, powerful result, because you purify the cause of the sickness, basically. Yeah, so of course the cause is not the cold weather when you get a cold, or the COVID, or a virus. There's just a condition, right? The real cause is karmic related, because some people, we have different experiences of the same virus, right? So that's kind of course, it depends on your immune system, but also in the immune system, if you have a good one or a bad one, there should be a cause for that, right? So that's what we call this law of cause and effect, or laws of karma, right? Yeah. So then whenever you experience a sickness or a difficulty in life, instead of just thinking, oh, this is too much, oh, this, oh, then the I comes up, and then there's, oh, I'm the only person in the world, I'm the worst one. You say that you kind of, your problem is the biggest one in the whole world. Nobody has this problem like you have. Your sickness, nobody has this suffering like you have. Your depression, nobody else has this depression. Yeah, often we think like that, but that's not true. You just walk on, you talk with people on the street or whatsoever, then they look from a distance, everybody looks quite okay. But then if you talk with them, you can see everybody has their problems, and that's pretty clear. We're not the only ones. Yeah. So that's very important to see that. So then you can see, oh, I'm not the only one. And then you try to generate kind of compassion for others, right? And then try to use this as a tool or method that it dissolves into your problems. And by dissolving it in your problems, you actually get rid of the cause of the suffering, with this negative karma. Because if you, in the past, you might have harmed others, and it caused the suffering or the sickness. Now you take away the suffering of others, and that purifies having harmed others, right? So that's kind of why it actually works, and that's one aspect. On top of that, your self-cherishing attitude is not that strong anymore when you do Tonglen, right? So there's not the, I have this problem, or I have this problem, oh, I'm sick, that disappears, because the mind becomes very strong. Okay, I'm sick, great. that kind of thought can come up. There's really the real practitioners. Geshe Lama Kunjo, for example, he was a great yogi. When he, just give you an example, he stayed 9 years in the mountains without eating or drinking. So then you think, how is that possible, right? Yeah, only using Julen, taking the essence not of pills but out of the air. So he lived under a tree and lived under a rock. And then he never showed the aspect of, I'm the yogi. Nobody knew, Then he was in Kopan monastery for quite some years and just eating tsampa with the kids, watching TV. Nobody knew. Nobody knew he was highly yogi. And then when he passed away, then after the cremation, very interesting. The ribs, like every rib had like, I think, 4 or 5 pearls popping up, And then there was different precious stone. The tongue, you can see the slow photo, became like in shape of Tara, crystallized. So there's many interesting signs, And then there's a way to check. Then there's kind of a stupa. There's quite a ritual they do, and then the holy body is then burned, And then underneath, then where the dust gathers, there's a way to put a kind of a shield that dust comes like this, you know. And then there's footsteps of a little child in the direction of his new incarnation. So very interesting science. So then you think, how is this all possible? And then the pearls that were being produced from the ribs or some other semi-precious stones of the 5 colors, for example. Then if you put it in a science lab, they say this pearl or this particular semi-precious stone, but they cannot say more than that. But it's very interesting, you know. So that kind of, there is something really very uncommon here going on. Yeah. So this person was a very highly realized being. I met him once in Singapore. We had some tukpa together. I was there for my Indian visa because we always running to a place where you could get easily student visas when we were in the monastery studying. And in the early days, it was not too easy. It was quite difficult to get visas. Now it's much easier. So then I heard in Singapore, one of my friends told me, you can get 5 years. Okay. Go there. And then I could 5 years. I couldn't believe it. Go out embassy, look again. Oh yeah, 5 years. Oh yes, that's really true. But anyway, then I was in Singapore and then I spent some time with Geshe Lama Kunchok. And at that time, he had his stomach was taken out because of cancer. You know, he was showing the aspect of getting sick and passing away. But he was so cheerful, you know. And he could only have liquid food, you know. But he was so cheerful. I mean, he was just joking around about life in Serra and things like that, you know. So I didn't know he was a hybridized being, but I thought he's, generally speaking, a very easygoing personality if you don't have a stomach anymore, you know. And then he said, later on, he said, it was so beneficial to have cancer, so beneficial. Because he had many students, you know, and who did all kind of practices for him, you know, so they engaged in virtue. He said, having this cancer, so good, because so many people engage in so many virtuous activities because they don't think one life is not a big deal, right? So then you have to understand the way of thinking is many lifetimes. Yeah, so that's also an aspect of, okay, one lifetime, that difficulty, not a big deal, but I purify this, or, you know. So that's very important to have that bigger picture, as I talked about quite often. And then they don't really care that much about little cancer here and there, and then the body doesn't work anymore, so we get a new one. Yeah, that's Cancer Sitting, one of my also main teachers in philosophy. He was amazing, you know, everything from memory. In his mid-80s, his mind was like a sharp, you know, razor blade, very sharp. And then also getting old and hearing was going, like, what? And then his knees were going, and then he said, oh, it's time to get a new body, you know. That's true, you know, that's how they think. There's one lifetime is not a big deal, you know. So that's what I said, this mind training, the bigger the picture you have, the easier the mind training becomes, right? If it's just in this life, then this mind training, as we traditionally explain, doesn't make much sense. Yeah, so that's a little bit important to see the bigger picture. Yeah, and then to take obstacles into the path with these kind of techniques, or hardships. You know, sometimes we say for more people who are more advanced in Buddhist study and practice, sometimes it's difficult, you know, or emptiness, like so complicated. You see, not so complicated, it's just a little bit difficult, but not too much. We will see in the next model on wisdom, you know. But some people say, oh, so difficult, ooh. But then if you go into emptiness, say, oh, how difficult, my mind gets negative now. Oh, great, this is a sign of purifying of negative thoughts or negative patterns. So the attitude becomes completely out. Yeah, the attitude is very important. So that's very important to understand. If you have an issue and you cannot do anything to solve that issue or to get better, then you have your mind left, right? So that's kind of, what do we do with our mind in those cases if we cannot do anything about it? Yeah, that's why we talk about mind training. And those kind of cases, these kind of tonglen, or seeing it as a part of acceptance because of karma, right? So it's not because of karma, it's kind of a thing we just have to have blind faith in, because we talked about before, if you explain karma well, it's very scientific. You know, if you really explain that every activity we engage in, physically, verbally, or mentally, yeah, that information is never lost. Yeah, so that aspect is very scientific. Yeah, how information carries over in time, memory, how that carries over in time, as we talked about before. In a similar way, every mental state, you know, those potentials are there, of the good thoughts, of the bad thoughts, they are there, and they're not there from one lifetime, from beginner's lifetime. Yeah, so then if you understand those aspects, then karma starts to make more sense. Whatever activity we engage in, that comes to an end, that disintegrates, and that becomes this potential by itself. And that's why we can remember things, you know. So in a similar way as memory works, in a similar way also karma works like that. Yeah, every activities we have engaged in the past, that carries on information for the future, you know. So that's and then we say, yeah, but we cannot see it, I cannot understand it, but the whole world is like that, you know. The whole world is made out of quanta, you know. So if you look at David Bohm's interpretation of the implicate order, then you can understand that things are very complex, you know, and also can understand that things are hidden from our sensory perception. We cannot understand everything, you know, even in science, there's so many questions. Yeah, but there's a logic behind law of cause and effect, that information is carried over time, and then when the right conditions meet, that comes to ripening. Yeah, so that's kind of a few aspects. Yeah, so that's one aspect of the mind training, more traditional explained. If you're interested in Tonglen, then you can first of all think about, still within the tradition, you can think about you know, but when you're experiencing suffering, you can think about, oh, I purify negative karma for the future. Yeah, so then by experiencing this sickness or experiencing this difficulty in life, then you can think, oh, by experiencing this, may I purify all my negative karma. That's also a way to look at it, you know, as a personal thing. So by experiencing this sickness, may all my negative karma ripen in this sickness. Yeah, so that's a way to purify negative karma. Yeah, and then when you take it into the Tonglen of the Bodhisattva ideal, then you say, may all sentient beings suffering ripen in this sickness. Yeah, so there's two different methods you could think about in the Tonglen practice, and mostly we start with our own suffering, and we just start with this kind of training, and then later on we can think about others the more we train in bodhicitta, for example, you know. Yeah, so that's kind of a traditional aspect, you know. Then a more secular aspect for those who find this all a bit too much. Then you could also think that between you and another person or others, so to say, there's white light, you know, a ball of white light, and then all the suffering of all sentient beings dissolve into that. It's also a possibility, right? That's not really a traditional Buddhist way, but yeah, you can use that as a secular or universal kind of way if you find the other methods a bit too much. Yeah. But yeah, it's also important to understand, because it's called discovering Buddhism, right? So I also have a responsibility to explain the traditional way, right? Yeah, and for those who, and I've seen that those who really have interest in these traditional methods, there can be incredible benefits. You know, that difficulties in life you can take up so easily. You know, I've seen that with Lama Zopa Rinpoche, for example, all the different projects Rinpoche was engaged in, so many obstacles. Things don't go well, or lose money, or somebody steal some money, or it's constantly like that. But Rinpoche is like, oh, yeah, like, yeah, just move on, you know, just kind of keep going, and that's the thing. The mind doesn't get disturbed. You see, same with His Holiness Dalai Lama, so many difficulties in Tibet, you know, but just keep going, and we you know, eventually we help sentient beings, and we just keep going. Or when the Chinese try to, that's what Soren said many times in the early days, when the Chinese try to kill me, then it doesn't matter, I just go on next lifetime. Yeah, I just keep going, you know. So that kind of attitude is very powerful. If you have this long-term vision, as we talked about quite a few times before, then all little goggly goo kind of difficulties in life becomes not really that much of things to worry about, you know. And especially if you see, okay, there's karma ripening, then it's much easier to accept difficulties and take, okay, that's how it is, okay, move on, you know. That really helps a lot. On the secular way, the aspect of kasa, of acceptance is so important, you know, understanding the cause of the suffering. It's very important. Yeah, I said many times, my father passed away. He took it so well because he read about death and impermanence for some time, and then said that was very beneficial because I was preparing myself and I understood it now. So yeah, of course, sadness was there, but didn't go in the extreme of depression. Right. So it's very interesting by just understanding reality, you know. Yeah. So then we get acceptance, and then when acceptance is there, much easier to deal with problems in life. You know? Yeah. Okay, so that's one aspect I was planning to talk about. The other aspect we talk about is related also to transforming problems into happiness, and well, with regards to what we call the 8 worldly dharmas, you know. Yeah, so that's kind of a very important 8 points within the mind trainings, you know. The 8 worldly dharmas, and then you see they are also involved with afflictions, you know. And the 8 worldly dharmas is also very strong on kasa, on death and impermanence. Because if you have this vast vision, as we just talked about, and you understand death and impermanence, and you understand there's many lifetimes, then a little bit of difficulty in one life is not a big deal, you know. Then only focusing on one lifetime is not really, you know, that much of benefit with regards to think about all those future lifetimes, because one lifetime is very short, you know. It's, what is it, 80 years or something, but other lifetimes in the future are much longer, right? So you broaden your vision in that one lifetime is not a big deal, you know. So that's kind of, the more you contemplate death and impermanence, it's also very easy to deal with problems in life, because you see, okay, you know, not a big deal, you know, just move on and try to do my best, and then go on next life, you know. So that kind of death and impermanence is very essential. If you don't really have a good recognition of death and impermanence, then the 8 worldly concerns, or the 8 worldly dharmas, sometimes we translate as 8 worldly concerns, sometimes we translate them as 8 worldly dharmas, yeah. Then you see that only getting attached, as we call it, or grave for this life is not going to bring much happiness, you know. Yeah, so that's kind of course, you can, as I said before, there's nothing wrong with enjoying things in life, but that's nothing wrong with that. But the more desire there is, the more attachment there is, then there's a problem. Yeah, because then you have too many expectations, or when you have difficulties and you want to be separate from the difficulties and you cannot, then irritation comes, right? This is often also the case, you know, when we have to deal with a person we don't like to deal with, or a situation, then it's in front of our face and we don't like this and we want to escape it, but when we cannot escape it, then we get irritated, you know, then we get angry. I don't like this, you know, and then we shout at the person, or we get angry, you know. So yeah, so there's 2 aspects here, right? If you have too much desire to the things we like, yeah, and we talked about it quite a few times before, desire or strong attachment overestimates the qualities of a person or of a situation or of an activity. Yeah, and then you have so many expectations, and then you meet a person, or you have this meal you attach to, you have this new computer or new phone, you thought, oh, if I have this, I'll be so happy, but then you have it, and then it's all quite normal, right? So that's I told the story with my mother also, I think, a few times, that, you know, when we together, then we have so many expectations. Oh yeah, we go together, you know. Oh, and then this, we do that, and this, that, and then we see each other and we together, and then it's kind of, it's nice, but it's kind of normal. Yeah. So we have these expectations before we meet, and that's kind of based on attachment, right? And that's the problem. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with meeting people, with enjoying things and doing things together. There's nothing wrong with that. But the stronger the expectations and the stronger based on attachment, the more suffering there is. Because then you have too many expectations and you don't meet those expectations because those expectations are in your mind. They're not in the situation or the person or or the mobile phone you buy or something like that. Yeah, oh, if I have this, I will be so happy. If I do that, I will be so happy. That's the problem with attachment, you know, that we think, oh, if I do this, that makes me happy. If I do that, that I will be happy. And the stronger the attachment is, the stronger the desire is, the less happier you become, the more disturbance comes to the mind. Yeah. So that's the problem. There's nothing wrong with doing nice things in life, I said many times before. But the stronger the attachment is, it's like, oh, then I have this, oh, then the mind gets really disturbed, you know, and there's no satisfaction, and then you want to do this. You know? So that means that the object of desire or the object of attachment or the activities or whatsoever is not that the more you engage in them, you become happier and happier and happier. We see same with drugs or things like that, you know. It's not that the more drugs you take, you don't become happier. So then you need a cocktail, then put this together, that together, and then still nothing, no happiness. So then you try something else. See, that means that when it's based on desire, it can be very destructive. You know, that's the problem. That the stronger desire is, the more destructive it becomes. Yeah, so that's kind of one aspect as we come and talk about. And same with anger on the other way, as we say, anger overestimates the faults of its object. Yeah, attachment, as we know, overestimates the qualities. Yeah, with attachment, you have too many expectations because you think, oh, when I do this, then I will so happy because of this. We put so many qualities in our object of attachment than the object actually has. It's in our mind. Yeah, when you buy a new phone or you order a meal, as we talked about before, in our mind we build up, oh, I have this, then I was so happy because this and this phone can this and that, and the meal is so nice. But then when we have the meal, you know, or we have the phone, and then after one day it's kind of, or 2 days, maybe a few days, okay, a few days, like, you know. So that means that to have a nice phone and you know, use it, there's nothing wrong with that, but the desire for it initially, or the attachment, that's the problem, because they have too many expectations you make up in your mind, and it's not with the object. That's what we mean with this creating our reality in our mind, and then think it's with the object, but actually it's just in the mind. Same with a person, same with every object of attachment or desire. With anger is the opposite, right? Anger overestimates the faults of its object. Yeah. So then when you see that object of anger, then you think this person is like this because that's how I see that person. Yeah. And we saw already with equanimity that the person we dislike can be somebody else's friend. So we might see 80% faults in that person and 20% qualities. Somebody else sees exactly the opposite. 80% qualities and only 20% faults. But the person is still the same. It's just how we look at the person, how somebody else looks at a person, that makes a difference, right? So that's kind of, you can see that these afflictions, they're not in accordance with reality. Yeah, yeah. So then when we meet difficulties in life and we don't like them, and we cannot separate ourselves from them, and if there's no acceptance, then we get irritated. Oh, I don't want to be sick. Oh, why now I don't have time to get sick? And then we, yeah, or I don't, you know, sometimes you're busy with things and you think, I don't have time now to get sick. And then you get irritated, you know, and that's actually worse than the sickness itself, because mentally you get completely disturbed. Yeah, so that's very important to recognize these destructive emotions, that it's kind of what it says, destructive, you know. Yeah, so the 8 worldly dharmas are in relation with attachment and anger, or we say involved with attachment and anger. Okay, so let's have a look at the 8 worldly concerns or 8 worldly dharmas. Yeah, so we say worldly. And why do we say worldly? Because from the point of view, it's related with only this life. Yeah, this kind of, and there's aspects involved of the self-cherishing attitude. Yeah, for yourself, this life. If you only take for yourself this life, then there's not much happiness to be gained. Yeah, so that's kind of what we talk about. Yeah, so the 8 worldly concerns. So there's 4 groups, and there's 2 aspects each group. Yeah, so hope for happiness and fearing suffering, and that's quite natural. Of course, we all wish happiness and don't want suffering. That is our. You could argue, or you could discuss that. That's the meaning of life. wanting happiness and not wanting suffering, right? We all agree that each and every individual has that wish, wanting happiness, not wanting suffering. Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with that. But having attachment towards the happiness, yeah, or the strong desire, craving for happiness, and aversion for suffering, yeah, because we don't like suffering. So then aversion, irritation, anger comes. Yeah. So you see, happiness is involved with desire, and suffering is involved with anger, or irritation, or aversion, if you like to call it. You know. So that means that if you have a strong desire for happiness, but you don't get it, then you get disturbed. But if you don't have desire and you have happiness, then you just have happiness, right? Same with suffering. If you have suffering, although you don't like it, but if you generate aversion, then that's double suffering. It's mentally you start to suffer, right? So that means when we say the 8 worldly dharmas of hope for happiness, hope in its sense of really desiring or craving for happiness, right? This really craving for happiness. When you don't get it, then the mind gets completely disturbed. You know, so that's craving for happiness, and you could say craving for the separation of suffering. That's another way to look at it, right? If you crave for the separation of suffering, then when you suffer and you cannot separate, then you get into trouble because you crave for the separation of suffering, right? So that's why aversion then comes to try to escape difficulties in life. But if you just accept the difficulty in life, then there's no aversion, right? So if you just accept it, then you don't crave for the separation. Yeah, because if you cannot separate from suffering, then there's no point in craving for it, right? So if you're sick and you cannot do anything about it, you're stuck in the sickness, there's no point in craving for the separation of the sickness because it's not possible at that time. The more you crave for it, the more suffering you actually create in your mind. Yeah, so the more you crave for the separation, right? The more you crave for not being sick. When you're sick, then the mind gets very disturbed because you don't like this, don't like this, don't like this. This is what I said before. This acceptance is so important. Yeah. Okay, so that's the first two, right? So that means hope or craving for happiness, right? And fearing suffering, or you could say also craving for the separation of suffering. Yeah, so that's the first two of the 8, yeah, of hope for happiness and fearing suffering. Yeah, the second one, or the second group of 2, yeah, the third and the fourth one, is hope for fame and fearing insignificance. You know, that means yeah, hope for fame or attached to fame, and especially this aspect, and fear insignificant aspects of life. You know, it's very clear in modern times that social media is quite clear that especially on the younger generation, there's much more mental issues related with social media as well, you know, because there's kind of, oh, you have to be famous, or if you're just insignificant, if nobody really, if you don't have that many followers, then people feel like, ooh, you know. So that's kind of, yeah, even before social media was there, that people would, if you crave for fame and you don't get it, there's a suffering. There's not, if you're famous, there's nothing wrong with being famous. Yeah, so there's nothing wrong being an influencer or something like that. If you influence people in a good way, then of course, this is, the more followers you have, the better, right? That's pretty clear, you know. But if you crave for this fame and you don't get it, then there's a problem. So that means that the attachment or the craving for fame, that's a problem. Yeah, yeah. So craving for fame and fearing insignificance, or craving for, you know, the separation of insignificant, right? Yeah, so that's kind of same thing. So the more you think about death and impermanence, this point is very easy to not worry about too much. Because if you think about death and impermanence, then you know, if I get famous in this life, then that doesn't imply I'm famous in my next life, right? So it's not a big deal if you're famous or not. Of course, if you can use it in a good way, you know, then that's good to be famous, right? Yeah. So yeah, but then without a desire, without attachment for it. Yeah. So yeah, that means that yeah, hope for fame. Yeah, and fear insignificance. Yeah. So there's kind of two aspects there. Yeah, that's the second group. Yeah, or you could say 3 and 4. Then the third group, or 5 and 6, you know, is hope for praise and fear blame. Yeah, so that's we like that. Praise, everybody's like, ooh, somebody praise you, it's like a little bit comes up right in the mind. Yeah, but if you, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you get attached to it, yeah, if you crave for it and somebody doesn't praise you, then there's a problem. See, so that's kind of very interesting to see. There's nothing wrong with being praised, but how we react to this aspect, you know, that's very important. So yeah, if you generate a kind of strong desire for praise and you crave for that, then when it doesn't happen, there's a suffering. You see, so that's kind of yeah. And if you think about death and impermanence a lot, then you think, okay, one lifetime famous, not a big deal, because in next lifetime it doesn't matter. I mean, if you die at the moment of death, a person who is very famous and a person who is not famous at all, or a person who is praised and a person who doesn't get praised, at time of death is the same thing, right? Yeah. So yeah. So yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So the kasa, hope for praise and fearing blame. Yeah. So if you hope and crave for praise, when you don't get it, then there's suffering. And then fearing blame, if you don't like blame, you know, and you crave for the separation of being blamed or being criticized, then when it happens, you might get disturbed. You know, so that's kind of, so these extremes we try to avoid. That's what it talks about, right? Yeah. So if you crave for the separation of being blamed, then when somebody criticizes you, or then it's very difficult to deal with. But if you do this kind of mind trainings, then, you know, when a person is very attacking you or something like that, you know, with all kind of negative speech or something like that, then you can do two things. You can just take it and, oh, this is not nice, oh, this is not nice, oh, and suffer from it. But you can also think it's just words, because the words, they don't really harm, right? That's quite clear. The words don't harm, but our mental reaction, that's the thing. You know, if you just listen to words and then you think, okay, just words, and the person who is saying things, often that person also is disturbed and has strong afflictions in their minds, you know. So that means the person who criticizes you, if it's correct criticism or not, then also that person can be completely disturbed by afflictions like irritation or anger, and then you can see, okay, like a drunk person, when a drunk person says something nasty to you, you say, oh, it doesn't matter, this person is drunk. A person with an addiction problem and shouts at you or something like that, then we say it doesn't matter, the person is you know, is on the influence, you know. But actually, a person who has strong anger is actually exactly the same thing, you know, because the minds of the person in a strong aspect of anger, deep down below, that person wants peace of mind and happiness. And then when the mind is completely disturbed by anger, and then this person is in this emotional hijack, then the real problem is not the person. The real problem is the affliction in the mind of that person, right? Yeah. So that's also very important to see, that the words by themselves, they don't really harm, but how we react, our mental attitude, that's very important, you know? Yeah. So, yeah, that's very interesting. Praise and blame. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, for example. You can see Lama Zopa Rinpoche was kind of a master of abandoning the 8 worldly dharmas, so to say, you know. So Rinpoche doesn't care what people think at all. So one day he was teaching in the monastery, and Rinpoche is well respected, you know, in a monastery. There's thousands of monks attending one day Rinpoche's talk, you know. So everybody's expecting, you know, teaching. And then Rinpoche starts off with a story. He said, you know, I'm actually quite stupid, you know. He said, I was in you know, in Tibet, didn't really study, just playing around. And then I came to India, And then I was just interested in learning a bit of language or English, but I still don't speak English very well. And I was not really studying philosophy or practicing Dharma, you know. So that's how he started his talk. There's thousands of monks there, you know. It's very interesting. And then yeah, he just, yeah. So Rinpoche doesn't care what people think, you know. And then when people praise Rinpoche, they say, no, not true. They show a very humble aspect, you know. I saw it many times. So that's a sign that they completely practice these aspects. They don't care too much what people think. And that gives a lot of peace of mind, you know. If you think about, oh, what will they think when I say this? What will they think when I say that? Or if I post this, what will people think? Oh, now I've got a kind of people comments. Oh, now one of my friends also photographed and put on this social media, and it was a bit wrinkled, because like that, you know, t-shirt. Yeah, and then somebody made a few comments. He said, somebody made comments. I said, do you all read it? Yeah, so then it kind of, you know, it's kind of one way is it doesn't really matter that much. If you really, for yourself, you have a kind of mind that is in accordance with the correct motivation, then it doesn't matter too much what other people think, right? Because for you are in a kind of, you know, you for yourself, you generate correct motivation, do the things the best way you can, and that's the real way forward, you know, because there will always be people saying different things. Even the Buddha, you know, can you imagine? The Buddha, enlightened being, had people who criticized the Buddha, you know. So yeah, then you cannot prevent people from criticizing you. That's not possible. That I can guarantee you. You know, I cannot guarantee you enlightenment during the Discovering Buddhism course, but I can guarantee you that you know, that you cannot escape people criticizing you. No way. Even if you, you know, even a world leader or a Buddha or a very high realized being, there will always be people who don't like you. You know, that's the reality. You know, so that if you have that reality, then it's okay if people say things that you don't like, isn't it? You know, so that's kind of. But when you get attached to not hearing those things, or the separation of hearing those things, then there's a problem, because then when you hear it, it's very difficult to deal with, you know. Yeah, so that's kind of an aspect of hope for praise and fear for blame, you know. That's kind of yeah, that's the strong craving for having fame, and sorry, for having praise, and the strong craving for the separation of blame. That's the problem. Yeah, so that's kind of aspect. There's nothing wrong with being praised, and there's, you know, nothing wrong being criticized sometimes. That's how it is, life, you know. Yeah. So that's the second, sorry, the third group, or 5 and 6. Then the last one is hope for gain and fear loss. You know, to want more happiness, and sorry, more happiness, but yeah, and then when people think it's money, you know, money makes the world go round, or money makes you happy, you know. So if you crave for gain, when you don't have it, then it's difficult. Yeah. And if you fear loss, or you crave for the separation of not having enough, yeah, then when you don't have enough, then there's a problem. Yeah, so that's kind of, you can see some people, they can live on the street and they can be quite content. You know, there was one in Delhi, in India, in Delhi, when we have Buddhist center also in the House Khas area, very nice area. And there's one of my friends who was taking care of the center, and there was a little family living on the street. And yeah, I've been there a few times, and sometimes we give the kids something, or some food, or, you know, bring some food to the family. And then they had organized to move the family in a house. You know, they had organized some sponsorship and everything, but then actually they didn't like that. It's very interesting. So they want to go back to the street, you know. So that means that you know, wealth doesn't really, you know, give the cause of happiness. That's pretty clear. You know, and you can see very wealthy people doesn't imply to have happiness, right? So that's very clear, you know. Yeah. So yeah, then if you crave for gain, wealth, when you don't get it, then there's a problem. Yeah, so that's kind of aspect. If you fear loss, same thing. Some people, they lose so much money in a scam or overnight in doing investments or business like that, you know. So that's the nature of reality, you know, that sometimes you have a lot of money, sometimes you do not. Yeah, so that's also an aspect of life, or an aspect of yeah, samsara, you know. Yeah. So hope for gain, of having attachment to too much gain, and then fearing loss, you know. Yeah. And you can see that with wealthy people, those who are who don't have a really strong self-cherishing attitude and do a lot of charity, very peaceful people, generally speaking, very open-minded, very easy to talk to. But people who keep all the money for themselves, they always crave for more, and they fear to be separated from it. Yeah, so there's a lot of suffering. You know, that's quite clear. That yeah, just live simple. Sometimes can be very can give a lot of contentment. You know, not yeah. So the contentment is such an important quality. You know, that in the West we have so many things so organized, but when things go wrong, like with the pandemic, or the electricity goes, ooh, and difficult. Yeah, but if you're used to that kind of life, then it's okay. You know, so that's the mental attitude is so important. You know, that's why we talk about it constantly with the 8 worldly dharmas. How do we deal with an issue? Yeah, if a train breaks down or the train is completely mixed up, you know, you can see the same situation of a train being too late. Some people say, okay, yeah, that's okay. Some people say, oh, you know, and that's the situation exactly the same. But two people have completely different mental attitudes. One is quite peaceful and goes home with a relaxed mind. The other person goes home with a disturbed mind. You know, so then the situation is exactly the same. So that means how mental attitude to situations plays an incredible role in the experience of happiness or suffering. You know, so that's kind of what we call about transforming problems into happiness, or transforming problems is that we always say, Shantideva said that if you have a problem and you cannot do anything about it, then you shouldn't worry about it too much, because you cannot do anything about it. If you have a problem and you can do something about it, you should also not worry, because you can do something about it, so you should do something about it. It's a very interesting form of advice, you know. Then, for example, if you have, you know, a particular difficulty in life and you can do something to solve it, then, and you have the methods to do that, you do that. But if you have not, for example, old age, we cannot prevent going and degenerating. Yeah, our body is degenerating. That's pretty clear. You know, your hair will become more gray and falling out, and wrinkles come, and things will become more difficult physically. You cannot escape that reality, right? So if you crave for not having that, then there's a problem, right? But if it just happens to you and think, okay, that's part of life, then it's very easy. You know, that's very easy to deal with these difficulties you cannot escape. So that's what Shantideva says. If you have a problem you cannot solve, you shouldn't worry too much about it, because you cannot solve it. There's no point in worrying about it, you know. And we do that we do this so much, like 95% of what we worry about will not happen anyway. Right? Yeah. So then we, oh, this, oh, that, oh, this, oh, that, oh, that, oh, that, and then anxiety comes, and then it builds us all up, and then it's just kind of, yeah, that's kind of creating actually more suffering than there is. Yeah. So mentally, that's what we're talking about in the mind training. We try to contemplate or understand these aspects of the more you understand death and impermanence, then these things almost comes naturally. If you understand death and impermanence, then you know you don't hope for gain and fearing loss. It's not a big deal, because when you die rich or you die poor, when you have to leave everything behind, you cannot take the money with you, right? So that means that a person dying rich or dying poor, there's no difference. You know, the inventor of the Xerox machine, I don't know if his name is Mr. Xerox, I'm not sure. But he was an interesting personality. He made a lot of money, you know, and then he said, I want to die as a poor person. So he gave all his money away, mainly to Professor Stevenson, who did this research on children remembering previous lifetimes, you know, so that he funded the research for 40 years. It's quite amazing, you know. So yeah, that's interesting because it's true. When you die, you cannot take the money with you. I mean, in history, you can see that they made a grave and they put all the things in the grave, but it's just a corpse there. It's not going to take to the next life, right? So it's kind of in history. In China, I saw once even they have soldiers, and if there's an empire or something like that, and all soldiers and make like statues and like hundreds of them, and they go together in the grave. I mean, huge grave, of course. But yeah, that's just how people think. Oh yeah, maybe this happens, but it's just a corpse, right? Yeah. So then with gain and loss, there's no point in having too much attachment for gain and fearing loss, because when you die, there's no difference, you know. In the same way with praise and blame. You know, if you praise all the time or you're being criticized all the time, at the moment of death, there's no really you know, no really difference, you know. Yeah. Same with fame and insignificance. Yeah, same thing. When you die, there's not even one. Even if you have millions of followers, there's not even one who follows you when you die. Right? You just go alone, right? I mean, your conscience goes. Even if one of those followers dies at the same time, you still go in different direction in the next life, right? Yeah, you never have exactly the same ticket. Yeah. So that means that the more you understand death and impermanence, the more you see this doesn't, you know, and you can see that people who are in spirituality for some time, they have less of these difficulties in life. Also true for people who experience a near-death experience. You know, that's science, that's hardcore kind of statistics that, you know, most of the people who experience a near-death experience, when they can talk about it, that's a very important aspect. When their experience is being accepted, it's a very important aspect. In that group of people, almost all of them, their life becomes more spiritual, they're less attached to life, and these things, they're less attached to fame or less attached to being praised, because they understand life is temporary, you know. So that's kind of same what we try to accomplish with the contemplations on death and impermanence. The more you contemplate death and impermanence, the easier it becomes to not have these types of suffering, because then you know it's just temporary, right? So the more you understand death and the more you understand impermanence, then you know when you have a lot of money, you might lose it one day, or you might enter into losing your job and things are difficult again, right? So that's, if you understand impermanence, then same with the pandemic, then it's okay, no problem. But if you don't understand impermanence, you grave for this kind of permanence, and that's not true, you know. So that's kind of the contemplation on impermanence helps a lot with you know, to prevent these types of suffering, of kasa, of, you know, yeah, happiness, fame, praise, and gain aspect from the point of view of attachment, and suffering, insignificance, blame, and loss from the point of view of aversion, you know. Yeah. So yeah, maybe do a short meditation on death and impermanence, I was thinking, as a dessert of today. Yeah, why not? Yeah, death and impermanence. We've done that before, but yeah, from the point of view of the eight worldly concerns, that's a very important meditation. Yeah, the more you understand that you're going to die, the more you understand that everything is just temporarily, then there's less craving for things, right? Yeah, so that's kind of very important to if you have a good feeling of death and impermanence, then the eight worldly dharmas comes almost naturally, you know. Yeah. So let's do that in the last 10, 15 minutes or so. Yeah, so we do the same thing as last time. Yeah, the breathing, 9-round breathing to settle down the mind. Yeah? So again, block the left and into the right. Yeah, and hold a second or two. Block right out left. Second time in right. Out left. And third time. And then change. So left index finger block right in left. Block left out right. Second time. Yeah. Then when you're done, then both nostrils, right? Into both, hold for a second on two, and then out. And so also do that 3 times. So when you're done with it, then you do the placement meditation, right? To focus and count the breath from 1 to 10, and then make sure whenever there's a distraction, then bring your mind back to the counting of the breath, right? So let's do that for about a minute or 2. Then when the mind has settled down a bit, then imagine in front Sakyamuni Buddha. So there's a throne supported by snow lions. On top of that, sun, moon disk on top of a lotus. Until that Sakyamuni Buddha full lotus position, right hand on the right knee touching the moon disk. Left holds a begging bowl filled with nectar. Right. He wears the robes of a fully ordained monk and is made out of golden nectar light. He has a peaceful and smiling face, you know. So if you can visualize like that, or at least try to imagine or believe that the Buddha is there in front of yourself, right? In that aspect. And surrounding yourself, imagine the different beings undergoing physical and mental suffering, you know. And then think how wonderful it would be if you can do something about it. And for that purpose, first of all, you have to abandon the 8 worldly dharmas, and for that purpose, you have to understand death and impermanence. So yeah, based on that, make request to the Buddha in front. And then, yeah, imagine there's white light coming from his heart to your crown, crown of all sentient beings, surrounding yourself, and this bestows the blessings of the purification, yeah, and removing the obstacles, you know. in particular understanding that impermanence. So let's do that visualization for about a minute or so. The white light filling your body and purifying. Yeah. Think then that you completely filled with this white nectar light, completely purified. And then with the same intention, again, make request to the Buddha in front, and this time yellow golden nectar light comes. And this bestows the blessings to get realizations, right, from his heart to your crown and the crown of all beings. And then by receiving this yellow golden light, then imagine you get the insights into the Lamrim, and in particular, death and impermanence. So imagine that happening by receiving this yellow golden light, also for about a minute or so. Then think you also here completely filled with this yellow golden nectar light, right? The mind is really ready to understand the topic and this particular aspect of death and impermanence. And then we contemplate, that in the sense, first part that is definite, meaning can you escape? Is there a way you can escape that? Is there a doctor that can prevent you from dying? Is there a place you can go to? There's no death. Is there a medicine that prevents you from dying or not? So analyze that we cannot prevent it from happening. It's going to happen, And then it's kind of that is coming closer rather than further away. That's kind of every step we take, or every hour we come 1 hour close to death, right? It's kind of a reality, So analyze if this is true or not. So analyze it for about a minute or two. And on top of that, the time is very uncertain, right? There's no certainty. We wake up tomorrow, for example. Some people die young, some people die older in life, and there's so many causes and conditions that causes death, and our body is very fragile. So see that the time is very, very uncertain. It can just happen any moment, basically. Yeah, so analyze this also for about a minute or two. And then think, if you die, your body you leave behind, your friends and family you leave behind. So it's actually only your mind that goes, right? So it's more important to invest in our mental training rather than thinking about very worldly aspects of life, as we just discussed. You know, it's much more important to not get attached to the different things in life, or, you know, to crave for the different things in life, or to find it difficult to deal with difficulties. It's more important to train the mind, because when you die, it's the mind that goes. So it's important to develop the mind rather than getting too much involved in other aspects, you know. So try to see if this is true as well or not, you know. And then try to come to a conclusion, right, that sees it's true. I cannot escape dying, and it can happen any moment. You know, there's no certainty about the time of death, and it's important to develop my mind, because that's the only thing that goes to the next life. So come to that kind of conclusion. Just time to develop our mind rather than being involved in too many aspects of the eight worldly dharmas, you know. So come to that conclusion that from now on, you're gonna make this kind of decision to work on your mind a little bit more, and then focus on that conclusion for about half a minute. And then to conclude, you can request the Buddha to descend, right, to bestow blessings, to get his insight, and to know how to deal with difficulties in life by understanding the impermanence. And then the Buddha is very pleased and becomes smaller, while the throne dissolves into the lotus. And then being smaller and smaller, and then the Buddha descends to your crown, throat, and then at the level of your heart, you can imagine the Buddha dissolves into light and becomes one with your own mind, where you see the blessings of the qualities of the Buddha, so to say, you know, when the Buddha dissolves. Yeah. Yeah, so we can stop. So then if you do this meditation often, then you take a little bit more time for it. Then at a certain point of time, you start to realize that you can escape death, and it can happen any moment, right? And that only your mental development is of importance for future lifetimes. And then all these things we just discussed is much easier to deal with, because you know, it's all very temporary. Yeah, so that's kind of while death and impermanence is a very important contemplation in order to what we call abandon the eight-worldly concerns or abandon the eight-worldly dharmas. So the more you contemplate death and impermanence, the easier it is not to be attached to happiness. The easier it is not to have aversion for suffering, or the easier it is not to have attachment or desiring fame and fearing insignificance, right? The same the attached to praise and fearing kind of blame, you know, and the same for gain and loss, yeah, to be attached to gain and fearing loss. The more you understand impermanence, you know, it's all changing anyway. So there's no point in holding on to aspects of life. You cannot keep always the same kind of situation. That's impossible. Yeah, people lose jobs, people lose partners, or people lose, friends. It happens constantly. So that's a nature reality. So the more you understand that reality, the more you live in accordance to that reality, and the more you can accept it, and the less mental suffering there is. So that's kind of the basic principle behind these kind of mind trainings. And then you can go a step further and then take the Tonglen practice, or think it's the ripening effect of negative karma. And then if you combine them together, then it can be very beneficial for the mind if the things are difficult in life, how to deal with the situation, you know? Yeah. Okay, so that's, a few minutes over time, but yeah, it's okay. Yeah, if there's any questions, then we can see if there's answers. Yeah.
Thank you for everything. And basically, it is quite obvious that we live and we die.
Yeah.
So why we have to contemplate death when it's already here? So why we not focusing to be joyful?
Yeah,
happy?
of course. I mean, that's very important. As we said before, it's important to understand the reason why you meditate on death and impermanence. It's not to make us depressed, right? The reason is to motivate ourselves, you know. So we know we're going to die, but we don't have the realization that it can happen any moment, right? Because we still grasp the permanence. So that's why we contemplate it again and again to get this insight in it can happen any moment. And then that's much easier to enjoy the things in life, in the sense of not having the afflictions of attachment and aversion, right? So that's kind of the reason why we meditate on this, right? And then we understand reality more. If you understand reality more, then there's less suffering. Yeah. 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 So it's also important to know in the Lamrim, we always say it's important to know, why do I meditate on this, right? Then how do I do it? And then see if you produce the right mindset by the contemplation. Are you on the right track? You know, so that's kind of very important to do the self-research and check if you go in the right direction. And then the more you meditate on death and impermanence, then easier life becomes, actually. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, this doesn't seem to be about solving problems. It's more your reaction to them.
Yeah, exactly.
So the problem's still there,
yes,
and still reaching out to bite you.
Yeah.
But you're changing your mind towards the problem. But it's not, it seems a bit of a, I'm trying to put this in a nice way because I respect the teaching. I'm just trying to work it out. It seems a little bit like a doormat philosophy. That if somebody, like if Freddie here punches me on the nose,
yeah,
I just think in my mind, oh, he's punched me on the nose. It doesn't matter. I'm going to die one day. It's going to be all right.
Yeah,
you know?
That's what I said.
Really why I should get up.
Yeah.
I should stand up quick and move away from Freddie because he
Yeah.
might do it again. But it just seems a bit of a, it's just, how do I use this to solve problems? Because that's what I want to do.
Sure.
And also in solving a problem, this is slightly different. In solving a problem, how do I know how to benefit people around me? Because I try to walk into situations thinking, what's the best benefit, not only for me, but for my adversary in a
as well,
situation. How can I benefit this person, even though they're out of order? How can I help them? But then how do I know what's beneficial for them and me? Thank you.
So first, it's not the doormat aspect, because I said before, it's very clear to see if you're in a situation and you cannot do anything about it, then your mental attitude is very important. If there's a person who tried to punch you in the face, then it's better just to to prevent it from happening, right? Or even just with the physical thing, make sure the person doesn't harm anybody, right? With a good motivation, you can take action. With a good motivation, you can take action, right? So even in the Bodhisattvas, there's many interesting stories about Bodhisattvas taking very strong action to people who are very destructive for society or for a group of people. But the motivation is pure. To prevent more harm, you can take one person, take him to the ground or something like that, and make sure it doesn't harm anybody. And then with a good motivation, not try to harm the person too much, right? So that's kind of a part of the training as well. But we're talking about in situations where you cannot do anything about it. For example, you're tortured in prison, or you have a sickness and you cannot solve it at that time. Then how you deal with it mentally. And then we say transforming problems. You cannot prevent the problem, as you just said. The problem is there. You cannot avoid the problem because you're in the middle of it. But how you deal with it mentally, and how we experience it, and how we transform that experience in a way that is more beneficial for the mind. That's what it means, right? So that's very important to know, because with practicing patience or practicing Tonglen or practicing these things, it's not that being the doormat, you can be so direct and take action, but inside pure motivation. But if you're in a situation you cannot do anything, then you just left with your mind, right? So then in those cases, then we talk about these mind trainings, right? And then you transform the experience, so to say. For example, you're stuck in a train, like we had in India sometimes, 32 hours delayed, or 32 hours late on arrival. We've been stuck in between two accidents. Some people, in the West, people think, where's the rescue team, this, that, and that. But there we're just stuck for 12 hours in one place, and people just know that happens, and then of course some people get a bit irritated, but majority were quite okay. So this means, how do you deal with the situation when you're in that situation, when you cannot do anything about it? That's the thing, right? Is that clear? That's clear. So then how do you benefit others? And then what I said before, but we need a very pure motivation first of all, right? That to be able to help others. That's very important. And we sometimes just don't know what's most beneficial. We're not all knowing. We don't have the clairvoyance. But then with a good motivation, we try our best. And that's why the motivation is so essential, because until you have clairvoyance, you're just thinking maybe this, maybe that. You're not clear. But then with a good motivation, it makes a kind of positive virtuous deed, right? But the thing you use is kind of, okay, helping this person temporarily and ultimate. Also, those two things are very important. If there's more benefit on the ultimate or the long term, that's more, your effort should go in that direction. Because short-term benefit is not everlasting. So like I said often that one of my friends here works with homeless people in London, right? And there's two aspects there. You first create a temporary benefit for the person. You give them a shower, you give them a place to stay, you give them food, you give them some new clothing. That's temporary. But you also have to think about rehab if the person is in an addiction situation, right? So you have to think about rehab. You think maybe about re-education. So that's mean the long term. So the long term is very important. The short term is very, very short, right? So that's how we try to benefit others. We always have to think about short and long term. And then we mainly focus about the long term, And then from a spiritual perspective, we think about the benefit for that person in the spiritual path. So for example, Lama Zopa Rinpoche once, I think I told you this story once, about this wealthy family in Southeast Asia, very rich. Things didn't go well in business, right? And then they asked Lama Zopa Rinpoche for an observation. Then Rinpoche checks with his clairvoyance what should be done. So Rinpoche checked and told this family, do this, do this, do this, and this, did this, right? And then they did that, and they lost more money. And they lost the business. And then many people thought, oh, Rinpoche made a mistake. But actually, they became much more spiritual, and they became much more involved in the spiritual part. And that's much more beneficial, because on the long term, if you think about lifetimes, that's more beneficial. So that's how they think, you know. They don't think about if there's, on the short term, a bit of difficulty for that individual, but on a long term, more benefit, they choose to do that. Yeah, so that's constantly analyzing what are the short-term benefits, what are the long-term benefits, how can I benefit this person in both ways, with mainly focusing on the long term, and then you make decisions. You know, that's how all the bodhisattvas actually operate, in the sense of seeing what is the most beneficial to be done for this individual. Yeah, and if you don't have clairvoyance, then you have your motivation, right? So then you use with a good motivation, try to help the best way you can, and sometimes it doesn't work out. But then if it doesn't work out, then at least your motivation was pure, your act was pure, and then you just dedicate in the end, okay, it didn't work out, but there were some obstacles, difficulties, may in the future be able to help. Not only this person, but all beings without exception. And then it becomes a very constructive way forward, rather than thinking, oh, it didn't work out, forget it all, this is all too much. Yeah, because that's not very constructive. So that's how we try mentally to deal with motivating ourselves the best way we can. We do the things the best way we can. And then when things don't work out, when things work out fine, okay, perfect, you know, pray to do even more. But if things do not work out, then also we shouldn't get discouraged, because we don't have the world under control, you know. So then we just pray, okay, it didn't work out. In the future, may I be able to do this by having tried it now, and may I remove the obstacles for future development. Yeah.
So don't necessarily answer this, but I was going to say, how do I develop clairvoyance? Is that something I should be aiming at?
Yeah.
Should I be aiming for that or not?
I mean, that's a very good one, because Shantideva said, you know, if you really want to benefit, then that's a very important aspect. But it's not that easy to get, because you have to take about 6 months off, you know, and then you have to get calm abiding. And if you don't prepare your mind for that, then it's very difficult to get. So the best way to get to benefit others, including clairvoyance, is studying the Lamrim, right? As we do in DP, get more experience in the Lamrim, and then over time increase concentration. You create courses for calm abiding, and then when you get calm abiding, clairvoyance comes as a byproduct, so to say, right? Yeah. But until then, we just have to see and be realistic and know our limitations, right? And being realistic and know our limitations, then with a good motivation and using reasoning the best way we can, we try to do our best. You know, we have to start somewhere, right? We're not there yet. We have to start. The Buddha, exactly the same. Started like you and me, and started with a good motivation. Try, it didn't work. Okay, try again, make prayers, dedicate, and move forward. Yeah. 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 So don't get discouraged, because sometimes things are difficult, but the Buddha had exactly the same issues, you know, before. Yeah. So it's kind of, we have to start somewhere, right? Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. With karma, there's kind of like this aspect that I was wanting a bit more clearance. It's like your karma is like your individual kind of karma thing. But when, for example, the torturing in prison, it's like two people's karma working kind of together, no? Because the person who has the karma for that to happen, I guess, for the causes. But then there's the other person who's inflicting that. And so it's like the karma is kind of like, there's like a link between the karmas there.
Yeah, there's a kind of, because the person who has the karma to be tortured, then the person who's torturing is the condition, right?
It's the condition, yeah. But is that also their karma, or they're like...
I mean, you cannot be tortured if you don't have the karma to be tortured. You cannot get sick if you don't have the karma to get sick.
But the one that tortures also has like karma to...
Yeah, it has a habituation pattern of having tortured before and liking to do that, right? So, and then the person who's torturing also creates a lot of suffering for themselves in the future.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that means That's very true. Our habituation patterns carry on in even in one lifetime. We can see that, right? So these habituation patterns, they carry over many lifetimes. And that's, we call that karma, but it's just a web of correlations of habituation patterns. You know, that's what it is. You know, so that's in one lifetime is very clear. If you we had this dialogue with Robin, you know, last 2 weeks ago, about, you know, also habituation patterns in neuroscience. So the habituation patterns in neuroscience, and as we talk about in karma habituation patterns, we talk about the same thing. You can change your brain because there's neuroplasticity in a positive way, but also in a negative way. And there's just habituation patterns, right? So karma is very similar. So that means if you create a lot of these negativities, you create cause for suffering, one thing, but you also create inclination to do the same thing and create even more suffering, you know? So that's kind of, if you look at karma from that point of view, it doesn't look that kind of out of the book different thing, but it sounds very, very scientific, right? It's kind of habituation patterns, no? Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it's very complex because the person who is tortured, and then, you know, we all probably, I mean, most likely we all have the karma to be tortured, right? But we just don't have the conditions present at the moment, you know? That's the thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Look, Geshe, it's about taking others' suffering within us.
Yeah.
It is really hard when you are suffering physical and in mental pain.
Yeah.
You want to get rid of your suffering, but then I know that in Buddhism we practice that, taking others' suffering, and it's really difficult to like think about
at
it.
That time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why you should train when you're not suffering, when you're not sick, because if you train when you're not suffering, it's easier, right? Same meditation is much easier when we're not suffering. And then if you train your mind a lot, for example, when you fall asleep, you can do Tonglen, or whenever you have some time, or you travel in public transport and you don't have anything, you can just sit down and do Tonglen. So you habituate your mind to that, right? And then you read about it, you think about it again and again, and then the habituation builds up, you know. And then when you have a little, let's say just a fever or a cold, you know, then, because when it's very intense pain, it's very difficult, right? But with a little fever of cold, then it's much easier, you know. So you train in that, and then over time, when you build up a habituation, that even with stronger forms of pain, you're able to do that. It's kind of, we have to start when the suffering is not there yet, and then when the suffering comes, then it becomes easier. Otherwise, an untrained mind is very difficult to just dive straight into it. You have to have a very strong habituation, and then it's possible. And we see that with these people in prison, they practice a lot before, you know, in meditation, and then, well, the difficult things come, they just put teaching into practice. Yeah. So habituation is the key, no? Yeah. Over a long time, you know. That's yeah.
Thank you. I have one silly question.
Silly? I will silly answer then. Yeah. Yeah.
Because when you said think about the suffering. I have one specifically when we do meditation. So when I have parents, so nowadays I have parents, and so every month you have like 7 days really suffering. Particularly some people, maybe it's okay, me like half died. So when I'm thinking about this karma, because I'm trying to think, oh, I take other people's, I don't know who's pain I've been take care of that. I mean, because I'm female, because I'm a girl, a woman, so I must be suffer for that. I didn't.
No, it is not.
So this is
because we all have the same cause for suffering, and one lifetime we male, the other lifetime we female, and sometimes we suffer from this, and sometimes we suffer from that. You know, it's not something to do with being a particular person or something like that. It's just the continuity of that person, male, female, or whatever you are. You know, it's just a continuity of consciousness has causes of suffering, and there's various types of suffering. Right? That's much more intense forms of suffering. People with cancer, or almost dying, or intense torture. So the thing is that when we're experiencing these kind of periods or sickness, and we cannot do anything about it, then we have our mind left, right? So then we use it as an opportunity to say, okay, may all being suffering ripen upon the suffering I'm experiencing. So then you do something with that suffering rather than just feeling kind of, oh, I don't like this. Oh, yes, it's me again. Oh, why this, why that, you know? Because if you take it in, because you cannot escape it, but then if you think about, you take the suffering upon others with Tonglen, then you actually purify the cause of the suffering. Because the cause of the suffering is having done non-virtuous actions in, and we have all done exactly more or less the same amount of non-virtuous in different lifetimes, right? So then there's something coming to ripening, so you think, okay, now I take the suffering of others who I've harmed before, I've harmed other beings, but now I take their suffering, may that ripen in my difficulty or my sickness, right? So then you mental attitudes, first of all, is much stronger, because you don't have this why me all the time, or, you know, you have this kind of bright mind that is much more clear, you know. And on top of that, so that's one aspect of having less mental suffering. Then on top of that, you actually purify the cause of the suffering by doing the Tonglen. So you do two very important aspects. You take away the cause for the suffering by doing Tonglen of the purification of the cause of negative karma. And then your mental attitude becomes much more, you know, constructive, much more constructive state of mind, you know, to deal with issues, you know, rather than, oh, I'm suffering, this, that. You say, okay, suffering, accept, and then, you know, take the suffering of others. Yeah.
You come to my second question now. The first one, I understand like how mentally to think about this, but I want like, could you give more specifically the math? I mean the pathway, like, you know, Tao, because you know the Tao culture.
The down.
Like Tai Chi.
Yeah.
So that's it, because I'm looking for those days how to fix, because I have to suffer every month. And I say in Taoism, you say the Qi is definiteness, it's like less of Qi, or in the 5 elements, I have some part. So do you, in our religion, I mean Buddha, do you have the specifically way make me stronger? Not only, mentally.
Yeah, maybe similar.
Like just meditation or something.
I mean, physically, there's very similarities between these aspects in Taoism and Tibetan medicine, right? Or Chinese medicine and Tibetan medicine. A lot of similarities, in particular with the, you know, with the herbs and the elements being not in balance, and how to balance it all, right? Yeah, and that's mentally related, because there's no, everything is interdependent, right? The mind and the body. So, and you can see people with a much more positive view in life, when they're sick, they cure much quicker. Yeah, people with more pessimistic view of life, when they have a sickness, they have much more mental suffering, and the sickness curing process is much more difficult. You know, so it's very clear that people will say, okay, no problem, and then, you know, they get much better, quicker, better. You know, it's very true, because the mind and the body, of course, there is a dependence, right? Yeah. So mental attitude is so important, you know, and that's why we say in medical science it's very clear. But in Buddhism, it's extremely clear, because if you can take care of your mind, then even physical suffering, you can deal with it very well, you know. But if you cannot really deal with it mentally, then it's difficult, you know. So that's kind of a very clear aspect of that. When we have a problem and we cannot do anything about it at that time, when we're sick or mind's down or whatsoever, then we have to train our mind how to deal with it, right? So that's why we,
Thank you, Geshe. Thank you.
Hey, sorry. Online people are neglecting.
Online people?
Just 2 questions online, Geshe. Jeff, would you like to ask?
Yes, okay, hello, thank you, Geshe.
Thank you. Online, Jeff. Yeah.
Yes, that's right, I'm online, Jeff, today. Well, I think really you've answered any question I had about this, but I just wanted to quickly say that I do feel inspired by this, and I've got a little bit of practice, and I'm trying to learn these ideas, you know. And where I am at work, I work in a team that's, you know, the manager's good, But temporarily, I'm in a different team where the manager is a bit more difficult. And some of us say, oh, this is more stressful. Oh, we don't like this. And I'm thinking, well, actually, I'm going to turn this into an opportunity and to work through it and see how I get on. So you know, sort of trying to take this as inspiration. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Because it's true, you know, we cannot change people's minds like this. And sometimes the person you work with is easier, another person more difficult. So then our mental attitude makes a very big difference in how we experience it, right? Yeah. Yeah, very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Abelardo, would you like to go ahead?
Geshe, thank you so much. This has been a precious teaching. It's the most important teaching for me so far of discovering Buddhism with you. So, yeah, I had my 75-year-old birthday 2 days ago.
Oh, congratulations! Yeah, we should send you a birthday cake or something.
Yeah, you can still create a virtual one, and I'll accept it with a lot of gratitude.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm just joking. And,
yeah. Did you put the candles of the years left or the years gone?
Well, actually, if you or anyone here would like to visit my Facebook page, Abelardo Brenes, I wrote a reflection of what it means. I framed it both ways. Today's 75 years old, but also 3/4 of a century, you know, jokingly, because in Spanish in Costa Rica we have a saying, seis reales. Seis reales is like 75 in old time colonial money, you know, and almost anyway, it's a joke. But it really helped me process my own way of having lived through life, navigating these 8 mundane concerns that you were talking about. And it's all of that is so relevant, and it's so interconnected, and it's a wonderful approach. And I find that it really helps to balance the negation that in the Western culture we have of death with our deep-seated wish for immortality, and also accepting that it's a legitimate wish, maybe, but there's no assurance in this form. Only faith that one's essence will continue. So I just wanted to share this experience with all of you, and if you have any advice for me, I basically say in my Facebook page that I think I might live with good mental state and basically good health for another 5 years to 80, and then that I'm totally involved, you know, with the global problematique, you know, the poly crisis we're facing, and that no one is in control of the collective karma of humanity. Nobody. I do have a strong faith that the 8 billion people on the planet, all of us are close to developing our Buddha nature, you know, finding direct ways to, because that's our only hope. And so I really have a lot of faith in these digital ways of sharing.
Keep going like that, whatever is left, you know. That's important. Just keep going, and then if you keep going, and then if you die, whenever you die, then you keep going next life, you know. That's kind of that you just keep going, that if you die in 20 years or 30 years or 40 years, then just keep going, you know. That's the way you go now, and then contemplate, and then
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Cesar, that's it. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. So don't die, then you see you next week. Huh? Say again? Just I first say don't die and see you next week, and then we dedicate. Because if you die before we do dedication, then we miss out, you know. Okay, so let's dedicate this evening for spreading of Buddha Dharma in all directions, all beings quickly come in contact and achieve state of enlightenment without any obstacles. We could turn a Flam Soprimshe and two bodhicittas. Yeah.
Dage jine sape gewadi tendai jawa kunla gangpendai keba jetsun lozang jakbai tenpe ningbo ringdu zelje jo. May the glorious Guru's lives be long and stable. May all beings equaling the extent of space have happiness. May I and others without exception accumulate merit and purify negativities, and may we be blessed to quickly attain Buddhahood. Upten chi dan jam gun gyao den chu ya pela ka che razo pa sun den yu mi zen ba chu ye la ben den yao de yu Janjo Semjo Rinpoche Magye Panam Gigi Geba Nyamba Meba Yang Gomne Gombe Bewa Goni Tawa Rinpoche Magye Panam Gigi Geba Nyamba Meba Yang Gomne Gombe Bewa
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, see you next week. Yeah.